For many years, Pastor Kenneth Copeland has been one of the most recognized names in Christian ministry. He built a global platform, attracted millions of followers, and became one of the most talked about televangelists in the world. But today, things do not seem to be going as smoothly as before. Is this the beginning of a major change? Or is there more to the story than people realize? What is really happening behind the scenes? Join us as we uncover the truth. Kenneth Copeland's family challenges and growing questions. In May of 2024, Kenneth Copeland suffered a ruptured appendix. He was rushed into surgery and spent nearly 10 days in the hospital over 2 separate stays. The situation drew attention because it involved the same man who had spent more than 50 years telling people that strong faith meant they did not need doctors. For decades, he encouraged believers to trust completely in faith during times of sickness. This event also came after what he had publicly declared on Christmas Eve of 2022. During that message, Kenneth Copeland confidently said that he would never get COVID of any kind because he lived by faith. Those words were heard by many people around the world. Yet, less than 2 years later, he found himself in a Texas hospital, undergoing emergency surgery as doctors worked to save his life. When Kenneth Copeland returned to the pulpit after recovering, he spoke about his experience in a light-hearted way. He shared that while he was still under anesthesia, he had been singing love songs to his wife, Gloria, and reciting verses from the book of Hebrews. Members of the congregation responded with polite laughter. However, the reality of the situation remained clear. His health scare reminded many people that age affects everyone and that the human body naturally grows weaker over time. At the same time, the teachings that had shaped his ministry for decades faced even greater public attention and scrutiny. Another important moment came in March of 2026. Kenneth Copeland participated in a long-form, one-on-one interview for the first time in more than 15 years. The interview lasted for over 2 hours and was conducted by evangelical podcaster Bryce Crawford. The choice of interviewer stood out because it provided a friendly setting for the conversation. At the same time, one noticeable absence remained. Kenneth Copeland did not return for another interview with Inside Edition, where he had previously faced tougher questions. While these public appearances were taking place, important leadership changes were also happening behind the scenes at Kenneth Copeland Ministries. His son, John Copeland, returned to a major leadership position. John had stepped down as chief operating officer in 2018, following a highly publicized divorce. For several years afterward, he was listed only as a consultant. By 2026, however, the watchdog organization Ministry Watch confirmed that John Copeland had once again become the ministry's chief executive. His return placed leadership firmly back within the immediate family, strengthening the family's control over the organization. As these changes unfolded, Kenneth Copeland continued repeating a promise that has become one of his most recognizable personal claims. He has consistently said that he has a personal agreement with God allowing him to live until the age of 120. As each birthday passes, that statement continues to receive attention from both supporters and critics. Meanwhile, the ministry itself appears to be preparing for future leadership changes, even though those changes have not been openly discussed during its broadcasts. The Copeland family has also experienced deep personal loss. In May of 2021, Kenneth and Gloria Copeland's great-grandson, Clark Meyer, drowned. His death was especially heartbreaking because he was part of a family widely known for teaching that speaking words of faith over loved ones brings God's protection. Despite the tragedy, the family chose to keep the loss largely private. There was no nationally televised memorial service and no major Sunday message explaining how the event fit within the ministry's long-standing teachings. For an organization that places great importance on the power of spoken words, the silence surrounding the death of the young boy became noticeable to many observers. Another difficult moment came in 2023 with the death of Marty Copeland. She had previously been well known as the public face of the family's wellness and fitness ministry. Through that work, she encouraged viewers to honor God by taking care of their physical health. By the time of her passing, she and John Copeland had been divorced for about 5 years. Kenneth Copeland Ministries did not release a formal statement to its donor community regarding her death. The news also received very little attention in mainstream media. As a result, many people continued asking difficult questions about healing and how those teachings applied within the ministry's own family. Even before these personal losses, signs of difficulty within the Copeland family had already become visible. John Copeland's divorce in 2018 affected more than his personal life. It also ended his role as the ministry's expected successor. After leaving his executive position, he spent several years away from the top leadership structure before eventually returning as chief executive. His sister, Kelly Copeland, who is known within the ministry as Commander Kelly through the Super Kid Academy, has also experienced more than one marriage. Looking further back into Kenneth Copeland's own life, he went through 2 failed marriages before marrying Gloria. This part of his personal history is not included on the official Kenneth Copeland Ministries biography page. Senate investigation and public controversies in 2019. Kenneth Copeland faced one of the most talked about public confrontations of his ministry. The reporter who confronted him was Lisa Guerrero from Inside Edition. The meeting took place at a small private airfield in Branson, Missouri. She was investigating the fleet of private jets that Kenneth Copeland Ministries had quietly built over the years using donor money. At the time of that interview, the ministry owned several aircraft. These included a Cessna Citation Bravo, a Cessna Citation X, and a Gulfstream 5 jet that Kenneth Copeland had personally purchased from filmmaker Tyler Perry. According to the Christian Post, the ministry had not only acquired the Gulfstream 5, but was also asking supporters to provide an additional $19.5 million. That money was intended for aircraft upgrades and the construction of a brand new hangar. The request for those millions of dollars was directed toward many working-class supporters who had been encouraged to believe that sending in their last paycheck would bring them a 100-fold blessing from heaven. This made the growing collection of expensive aircraft an even greater point of public discussion. Several years before that airport confrontation, Kenneth Copeland had appeared on his own television program with fellow televangelist Jesse Duplantis. During that broadcast, they discussed why they believed they could not travel on commercial airlines. Kenneth Copeland stated that people could not get into a long tube with a bunch of demons and described it as deadly. Jesse Duplantis agreed, while Copeland laughed during the conversation about flying with ordinary passengers. When Lisa Guerrero approached Kenneth Copeland at the Branson airport, she was prepared to ask him about those comments. However, when she questioned him on camera, he denied ever making the statement. He firmly insisted that he had never said those words and told her not to claim that he had. The problem with that denial was that the original video already existed. The remarks had been made publicly during a broadcast produced by his own ministry, and many people had already watched the footage before the airport interview took place. As the conversation continued, the exchange became even more unusual. Kenneth Copeland repeatedly addressed Lisa Guerrero with terms such as sweetheart and baby. Rather than directly answering every question, he attempted to change the tone of the conversation. At one point, he even took her hand and tried to pray for her while they stood together on the airport tarmac. Guerrero continued asking whether it was appropriate to use donor money to purchase and maintain a Gulfstream 5 jet. Kenneth Copeland responded by saying that the matter was none of her business. That response became one of the most discussed moments from the interview because it reflected his unwillingness to explain or defend the ministry's financial decisions during the public confrontation. The same pattern of responding with displays of authority instead of detailed explanations became highly visible during the early months of the coronavirus pandemic. On the 29th of March, 2020, Kenneth Copeland appeared before television cameras, stretched out his hand, and declared that he was personally executing judgment on COVID-19. During the broadcast, he also demanded that a vaccine come immediately. Only a few days later, he appeared again and blew air toward the camera while claiming that his breath was destroying the coronavirus. His wife, Gloria Copeland, had also attracted widespread attention earlier. In the early part of 2018, during one of the deadliest flu seasons in nearly 10 years, she told viewers that flu season was not even real. She also said that Jesus had already given the world the flu shot. Later estimates from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention showed that around 52,000 Americans passed away during that same flu season. Because Kenneth and Gloria Copeland had a large national audience, their statements about illness and medicine received significant public attention. Critics argued that they were encouraging viewers not to trust medical treatments that were intended to protect people's health. Years before the pandemic, Kenneth Copeland had already become the subject of a major government investigation. In November of 2007, Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, who was serving as the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, sent formal letters to 6 of the country's best-known televangelists. Kenneth Copeland was among those selected for investigation. The other ministries included Benny Hinn, Joyce Meyer, Creflo Dollar, Eddie Long, and Paula and Randy White. Senator Grassley requested straightforward financial information. He wanted to know who served on each ministry's board of directors. He also requested information about executive salaries, the cost of private jets, and the location of each ministry's financial records. Eventually, 3 of the 6 ministries cooperated with the investigation by providing the requested information. The other 3 refused to cooperate throughout the entire process. Kenneth Copeland was among those who declined to fully participate. The official response came from Eagle Mountain International Church, the legal church organization that holds much of Kenneth Copeland's ministry together. The church stated that it had cooperated as much as possible without violating privacy and association rights protected under the United States Constitution. In practical terms, the ministry refused to identify the 10 members serving on its own internal board. Even when responding to a sitting United States senator conducting an official investigation, the organization would not reveal the names of the individuals overseeing its leadership. The Senate staff eventually completed its review, and the final report was released on the 6th of January, 2011. Despite the ministry's resistance, several financial details became public. The report revealed that the Copeland parsonage outside Fort Worth was an 18,000-square-foot mansion. The property had been appraised at $6.4 million and sat on 25 acres of land. The questions about its future to fully understand why many respected Christian leaders have spent decades warning people about Kenneth Copeland's ministry. It is important to look beyond the money and focus on what he actually teaches. While the financial controversies surrounding his ministry have received a great deal of attention over the years, many critics believe the teachings behind those financial practices are an even bigger concern. They argue that the ministry's beliefs are the foundation that supports everything else. According to these critics, once those teachings are accepted, the financial practices naturally follow. Kenneth Copeland has long been one of the best-known voices in what is called the Word of Faith movement. This movement has been influential for many years and has reached millions of people through television, books, conferences, and other forms of ministry. However, many Christian leaders have questioned where these teachings came from and whether they are supported by the Bible. The history of the movement goes back many years before Kenneth Copeland became well known. It traces back to a writer named E.W. Kenyon, who passed away in 1948. Kenyon wrote extensively about faith, healing, and spiritual authority. His writings later became highly influential within the Word of Faith movement. A preacher named Kenneth Hagin Sr. borrowed heavily from Kenyon's writings and later became one of the leading teachers of these beliefs. Hagin played a major role in spreading the movement and teaching many future ministers. Among those he personally mentored was a young Kenneth Copeland during the late 1960s. Before receiving Hagin's mentorship, Kenneth Copeland had already worked as Oral Roberts' personal pilot. His connection with Oral Roberts gave him exposure to another well-known healing ministry before he continued developing his own ministry under Hagin's influence. Over the years, some former insiders have also spoken publicly about the origins of these teachings. One of them is Costi Hinn, who is the nephew of Benny Hinn. Having grown up inside this same network of ministries, Costi Hinn has shared his own perspective after leaving that movement. In his book, Costi Hinn stated that the theological system taught throughout the movement rests largely on Kenneth Hagin's use of material taken from E.W. Kenyon. He even described it as plagiarism when discussing how Hagin built much of his teaching from Kenyon's earlier writings. According to critics, this raises serious questions about the foundation upon which the movement was built. They believe that if the original teachings themselves are questionable, then every doctrine developed from them deserves careful examination. Beyond the questions surrounding its history, Kenneth Copeland has also been criticized for specific teachings that have remained part of his ministry for more than 40 years. Two particular doctrines have attracted the strongest criticism from many mainstream Christian leaders. The first is commonly referred to by critics as the little gods teaching. During a 1987 broadcast of Believer's Voice of Victory, Kenneth Copeland stated that whenever he reads in the Bible where God says, "I am," he smiles and says that he is too. He expanded on this idea in one of his published books. There, he wrote that Adam was not simply a little like God, but was exactly like God. These statements have remained some of the most discussed teachings associated with his ministry. They have continued to draw criticism from pastors, theologians, and Christian scholars who believe they go beyond what the Bible teaches. Among those critics is Pastor John MacArthur. He has described this teaching as an entirely different gospel. Another well-known Christian apologist, Hank Ingraff, who became widely recognized as the Bible Answer Man, also addressed these teachings in his book Christianity in Crisis. In that book, he argued that Kenneth Copeland Ministries displays the characteristics of a cult. These criticisms have been repeated by numerous Christian leaders over the years, making this doctrine one of the most debated parts of Kenneth Copeland's ministry. The second doctrine that has received strong criticism concerns Kenneth Copeland's teaching about what happened after the death of Jesus Christ. According to Copeland's teaching, the death of Jesus on the cross by itself was not enough to provide